The rain fell in thin, cold sheets over the countryside as I stepped out of the taxi. St. Mary's Church stood on the hill like a stone sentinel, grey and weathered by time, its spire lost in the mist. My coat clung to my body, soaked at the edges, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were louder than the storm. I hadn't seen Edward Ashford in nearly a year. Not since we ended things. Not angrily, but quietly. Like the last breath of a candle before the flame died. And yet, here I was, standing outside his funeral, my stomach twisted with guilt and a grief I hadn't expected. Inside the church, I recognized familiar faces from another life. Edward's mother, Judith, her jaw tight as stone. His brother Patrick, who glanced at me as though I were something foul that had wafted in from the rain. I had no allies here. I was not welcome. Still I had come. I took a seat at the back, my eyes drawn to the casket at the front. Edward. The boy who once brought me daffodils in winter. The man who cried in my arms the night his father died. And now, he was the one being mourned, and I was the one being silently judged. The whispers began before the priest even entered. Snatches of sentences floated through the pews. She left him broken. He wasn't the same after Clara. She destroyed him. I closed my eyes. I could feel every eye on me, the weight of blame settling like fog on my shoulders. I kept my hands clasped tightly on my lap and forced myself to breathe. The organ groaned to life and the service began. Father Alastair, the village priest, stood at the altar and looked over the congregation. His voice was steady and kind as he spoke of Edward's life, of his brilliance, his charm, his sorrow. There was something in his eyes. Something I couldn't read. Then Judith rose. Her voice trembled as she spoke about Edward's childhood, his music, his kindness. But as she neared the end, she paused, glanced at me, and her tone sharpened. Edward gave everything he had, she said, even when it was not returned. Some people, she continued, took from him until he had nothing left to give. There was no mistaking the target. My heart dropped. I wanted to get up and walk out, but I couldn't move. The priest raised a hand gently. Judith, thank you, he said. But there's something Edward wished to share. Something he left behind. A letter. A ripple of surprise passed through the church. Judith blinked. Patrick frowned. Father Alastair held up a sealed envelope. He gave this to me weeks ago, he said, with instructions to read it today. After the service. Every heartbeat seemed to hang in the silence that followed. I looked at the envelope, then back at the faces that had turned towards me. The blame in their eyes began to flicker with something else. Doubt. And in that moment I realized, Edward hadn't told them everything. The service ended with a hymn, though no one really sang. The final chords echoed through the stone walls before silence settled like a shroud. Then, slowly, all eyes turned to the front where Father Alastair still stood, the unopened envelope in his hands. He cleared his throat gently. This letter was given to me by Edward Ashford himself, on a Sunday afternoon after Mass. He was calm, thoughtful. He asked that I hold it until this day. And now, with your permission, I shall read it. No one objected. Judith's hands were clenched in her lap. Patrick leaned forward slightly, brows furrowed. The room held its breath. The priest opened the envelope, unfolding the crisp paper. His voice was steady, though I noticed his hands trembled slightly. To those gathered here today. If you're hearing this, I suppose I'm no longer around. That's a strange thing to think about, but I want to say a few things that might matter. First, please do not blame Clara. She loved me the best she could, and I didn't make it easy. I pushed her away when I should have held her close. My sadness wasn't her fault. It was mine. I wore it like a second skin for years, long before she ever came into my life. A gasp rose from the congregation. Judith's expression froze. The priest continued, his voice soft but unwavering. Clara did not abandon me. I let her go because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen too clearly. She knew my pain and tried to lift it, but some weights you carry alone. I lied to many of you. I told you what you wanted to hear. That I was broken because of her. That she didn't care. That she walked away. The truth is, she stayed far longer than she should have. And I am grateful for every moment. My breath caught in my throat. The air in the church shifted. People glanced at each other. I kept my eyes on the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. I could feel the slow unfurling of the truth as it wound its way through the pews like smoke. There are things I should have said to her. I hope this letter says them now. Clara, if you're here, I'm sorry. You deserved better than the silence I left you with. And to everyone else, be kind. You never know the weight someone is carrying, even when they smile. Especially when they smile. I loved you all, in my own broken way. But please don't carry my pain forward. Let it end with me. The final words hung in the air like a benediction. The priest folded the letter slowly and set it on the pulpit. No one moved. Then Judith stood. Her face was unreadable, pale beneath her hat. She walked down the aisle, not looking at anyone, and out into the rain. Patrick remained still, but his eyes flicked briefly to mine. There was no anger now. Only something closer to understanding. Regret, maybe. People began to murmur, not about me, but about Edward. About what he'd kept from them. I stood up, legs trembling slightly, and made my way to the door. The wind outside caught my coat and pulled it wide. The sky hadn't cleared, but the rain had lightened to a mist. And for the first time in months, I could breathe without guilt pressing on my ribs. But I didn't leave. Not yet. I waited beneath the old yew tree beside the churchyard. The one Edward once said reminded him of ancient guardians. Because I had a feeling the day wasn't finished with me. The wind rustled the branches of the old yew tree above me, sending droplets of rain down my collar. I could still hear murmurs from inside the church, the low hum of shifting beliefs and shattered assumptions. But I remained where I was, grounding myself in the cool dampness of the Wiltshire air. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Clara. The voice startled me. I turned to see Patrick standing a few paces away. His coat soaked. His shoes sinking slightly into the soft ground. His eyes were searching, not accusing, just lost. You stayed, he said, almost as if it surprised him. So did you, I replied. He gave a dry chuckle, running a hand through his graying hair. I didn't think I'd want to speak to you again. But then, he looked back toward the church, I heard that bloody letter. We stood in silence, two statues in the rain. I didn't know what to say, so I let the moment stretch, giving him space. I thought he was happy, Patrick said quietly. At least towards the end. He told us you were cold. That you shut him out. That you left without a word. I know, I whispered. I heard the same things about myself from people who never asked me directly. His gaze dropped. I'm sorry. We all believed what suited us. I nodded, my throat thick. He was drowning, Patrick. And I was just a raft he clung to for a time. But I couldn't carry him across the ocean. He nodded slowly. He didn't want us to blame you. Maybe he knew we would. Behind us, the large oak door of the church creaked open. Judith emerged, umbrella in hand, face pale as chalk. She spotted us immediately. With the poise of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering appearances, she walked towards us, heels sharp against the gravel path. Clara, she said curtly. A word. Patrick took a step back. I'll give you two a moment. She didn't wait for permission. I suppose you think that letter changes everything. I stared at her. No. But it reveals everything you've pretended not to see. She flinched, just barely. Edward was my son. I knew his struggles. You knew he was depressed, I said softly. And you told him to keep it quiet. You told him to act strong for your reputation, your standing in the village, your precious circles. Her lips tightened. It was complicated. It was cruel. Her eyes flashed. You left him. He asked me to, I replied, voice shaking. He begged me to leave because he couldn't face your disappointment and mine at the same time. And when I stayed, he shut me out completely. A long pause. The mist blurred the edges of the churchyard as Judith's chin lifted in defiance. I did what I thought was best. For him? Or for you? Before she could answer, a soft voice called out, breaking the tension. Clara. I turned to see a young woman, barely 20, standing near the entrance of the cemetery. Her brown hair clung to her face from the drizzle, her hands wrapped tightly around a small velvet pouch. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, stepping forward. But Edward was my father. The world tilted. Judith gasped. What did you say? The girl looked at me. Her eyes were the same shade as Edward's, sea glass gray, filled with hesitation and hope. "My name's Elsie," she said. "And I think you deserve to know the rest of his story." Elsie's voice wavered slightly as she stepped closer. The velvet pouch in her hand seemed heavy with meaning, as if it contained a piece of Edward himself. "I didn't come to stir anything up," she said, eyes flicking from me to Judith. I think he wanted you to know I exist." Judith drew in a sharp breath. "Impossible. Edward would have told us. He was afraid," Elsie cut in, her voice suddenly firm. "He said his mother wouldn't understand. That he wasn't strong enough to disappoint you again." The silence that followed was suffocating. Judith turned away, her posture rigid, staring off into the rain like it could wash her back to a time before this moment. I reached out gently. "May I?" Elsie hesitated, then offered me the pouch. Inside was a small worn notebook tied with twine. Its edges were frayed, pages marked with smudges and ink blots. I opened it slowly, heart thudding. The first page held a date. 6 years ago. Just before I left. "To Elsie, if she ever finds this." The words were scrawled in Edward's familiar hand. I glanced up. "Did he give this to you?" She nodded. "The day before he died. He said, if I ever wanted answers, I'd find them here." My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Each entry was a fragment of a man trying to reconcile 2 lives, the one he showed the world and the one he lived in private. There were lines about me, about his regrets, about the way he had failed to seek help. And entries about Elsie, about the child he didn't know how to father, the love he didn't think he deserved. Then came a letter, dated only a few weeks before his death. "Clara, I failed you. I failed her. I couldn't carry the weight and I lied to everyone, including myself. I made you the villain in stories that weren't true, because it was easier than admitting I was drowning. You didn't leave me. I left you long before. I just didn't have the courage to say it aloud. If Elsie ever finds you, tell her I loved her. I just didn't know how to be her father and I couldn't ask for forgiveness I hadn't earned." I couldn't breathe. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Elsie placed a hand on my arm. "I didn't expect anything. I needed to understand." I nodded slowly. "He wanted to be brave. But he didn't know how." Judith turned back toward us, her face unreadable. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Because you never gave him room to be anything but perfect," I replied, not unkindly. She didn't argue. Patrick reappeared then, holding a thermos and 2 cups he'd clearly taken from someone's car. He handed one to Elsie with a small smile. "Tea," he said. "You'll need it." Storms rolling in. Thunder rumbled in the distance as we moved toward the stone bench near the church wall. For the first time in days, I sat without my spine rigid, the rain softening into mist. "What happens now?" Elsie asked. I looked at her, at the uncanny resemblance to Edward, at the pain and strength coiled within her like wire. "Now," I said quietly, "we read everything he never said, and we figure out how to carry it together." But even as I spoke, a thought pressed at the back of my mind. A single chilling possibility. If Edward had told this much to Elsie, what else had he kept hidden? The vicar's study at St. Aldwyn's was small and worn with age. Bookshelves bowed under the weight of old Bibles and history texts, the air tinged with the scent of candle wax and damp parchment. Father Malcolm stood at the window, arms crossed behind his back, watching the rain beat against the glass like a man expecting judgment to walk through the door. I had asked to see him privately, unable to shake the sense that something still didn't sit right. The journal had offered answers, yes, but not all. There was something too clean about it all, too final. And Father Malcolm had looked at me strangely at the graveside, as though he'd been holding something back. He turned as I entered, offering a quiet nod. "Clara, thank you for agreeing to see me." He gestured to the worn armchair across from his desk. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I admitted. "I found Edward's journal. He said things that change everything." The priest didn't respond at first. Instead, he walked to a shelf and retrieved a slim folder, yellowed at the corners, tied with a thin piece of string. "What is that?" I asked. "A letter," he replied. "Edward gave it to me a week before he died. Asked me to hold it until Well, until the right person came asking. My breath caught. He wrote another one? Not quite. He recorded something. A confession. He passed me the folder without ceremony. My fingers trembled as I untied the string and unfolded the single sheet within. It was a printed transcript, labeled clearly at the top. Audio recording, March 12th. Intended for Clara Rutherford. I looked up sharply. He knew I'd come back? I believe part of him hoped you would, Father Malcolm said gently. Even if he didn't believe he deserved it. I read. Clara, if you're hearing this, then I've failed to say it while I was alive. But I need you to know the truth before they bury me as a man I never truly was. I lied to everyone. Not just about Elsie, but about what happened the day you left. I froze. They think you walked away. That you couldn't handle it. Judith believes I begged you to stay. But I didn't. I pushed you. I told you to leave. I was cruel, Clara. I said things I can't take back. And when you finally did walk out that door, I told everyone it was you who gave up. Because I couldn't bear the truth. My eyes stung with tears I refused to let fall. I made you the scapegoat. I turned your silence into evidence. And when you never came back, I let the lie settle in. It was easier than fixing myself. Easier than changing. I made myself the grieving one, the left behind. But I was the one who broke us. The room swayed slightly as I lowered the page. Father Malcolm's expression was soft with sympathy, but I could feel the weight in his eyes too. He'd carried this truth alone for far too long. He asked me to tell you, the priest said, if you ever returned. But when you didn't come to the funeral at first, I thought, perhaps it was never meant to be told. I swallowed the ache in my throat. He let them believe I was the villain. 4 years. He hated himself for it. I stood slowly, fingers curling around the transcript. Does Judith know? She suspected something, I think. But Edward was her son. And grief makes saints of the dead. As I stepped outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the graveyard cloaked in gray mist. I spotted Patrick in the distance, walking with Elsie beneath a shared umbrella, heads bowed together like siblings. For the first time in a long while, I no longer felt the need to defend myself. But I also knew Judith would not accept this easily. She had buried a son she believed was blameless. And I was about to give her a truth she would never forgive. The door to the Rutherford Manor loomed large before me, its iron handle cold beneath my palm. I hadn't returned to the estate since the funeral, since the glares and whispers followed me through every hallway like shadows. But I was done being silent. The transcript burned in my coat pocket, heavier than stone. Judith answered the door herself, dressed in one of her tailored navy skirts and a stiff blouse, not a strand of silver hair out of place. Her eyes narrowed the moment she saw me. You're bold coming here. I need to speak with you, I said evenly. She stepped aside, reluctantly. If you've come to further ruin his memory, you'll be disappointed. I followed her into the drawing room, where the curtains were half drawn and the scent of lilies still lingered. A framed photo of Edward sat on the mantelpiece, his face forever frozen in a smile he rarely wore in real life. Say what you've come to say, she ordered, arms folded. I reached into my coat and unfolded the paper. I didn't come to ruin his memory. I came to give you the truth, straight from him. She hesitated, just a moment, when I placed the transcript on the coffee table. Her eyes scanned the page. I watched the color drain slowly from her face as she read Edward's words, her lips moving silently. When she looked up, the fury in her eyes could have cracked glass. No, she said. He never said these things. He did. He gave it to Father Malcolm. She pushed the paper away as if it burned. This is your manipulation. You want to rewrite history to redeem yourself. I don't need redemption, I said quietly. I just want you to stop hating me for something I didn't do. You left, she snapped. You abandoned us. You turned your back on this family. I left because Edward told me to. Because he made it impossible to stay. Judith's hands trembled slightly, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Pain, denial, grief all tangled together. He was my son, she whispered. He was everything. And he loved you, I said gently. But he lied to you too. Because he was ashamed. Because he knew the truth would destroy what little you had left between you. For a long time, Judith said nothing. She stood there, hands clenched at her sides, her eyes locked on Edward's photo. Then she turned her back to me. "Get out," she said coldly. "Take your lies with you." I hesitated. "I didn't come here to fight. I came for Elsie. She deserves to know the truth about her father." Her voice cracked like ice. "She has the truth. She has me." I left without another word. As I stepped into the garden, I found Patrick waiting by the gate, his coat pulled up against the wind. "She didn't listen, did she?" he asked. "No," I replied, my voice hollow. "But I said it anyway." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. "She might not be the only one who needs to hear the truth," he said. I took it. On the back, written in Edward's unmistakable hand, were 3 words. "For Elsie only." The envelope felt oddly light in my hand, yet I sensed the weight it would carry once opened. Back in my flat in Bristol, I sat at the kitchen table, the quiet hum of the city outside a contrast to the storm inside me. I turned the envelope over once more, reading the words again. "For Elsie only." I had no right to open it. But I couldn't just hand it over either. Not without knowing what it might do to her. She had endured enough confusion, enough absence from her father. Still, I knew Edward. If he wrote something for her, it wasn't a trick. It wasn't poison. It would be his final attempt at peace. I called Patrick. "She's home," he said simply. "I told her you might be in touch." I arrived at his house just past 6. Elsie opened the door herself this time. She looked older, as if only a few weeks had shaped her into someone new. Her dark eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand. "You've got something," she said quietly. I nodded. "From your dad." She stepped aside to let me in. The living room was warm, softly lit, with a few framed photos of her childhood on the mantelpiece. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her knees pulled up, guarded but curious. "I haven't read it," I said, offering the envelope. "It's yours." Her hands were steady as she took it. She looked at me once more, as if to ask for permission. Then she opened it. The letter was handwritten, the script unmistakably Edward's, elegant, slanted, a little rushed near the end. She read in silence. I watched her face for a long time, not daring to speak. Her expression didn't change at first. But then her eyes began to shine. She blinked rapidly, holding the letter a little tighter. "He wrote this after everything," she said finally. "After he knew he was dying." "Yes," I said. Her voice cracked. "He said he loved me." "He said he regretted not fighting harder to be in my life." She wiped her face, though the tears continued. "He told me he was ashamed. That he let other people, Nan mostly, decide what was best. But he knew he was wrong." She looked up at me. "And he said you never pushed him away. That he pushed you." I swallowed. "It's true." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Elsie folded the letter carefully, placing it in her lap. "He's still a coward," she said bitterly. "But I'm glad he told me." She rose and went to the mantelpiece. She picked up a framed photo of the 2 of them at the beach, one I hadn't known existed. Edward had a towel draped around her, both of them laughing. "I want to believe he meant it," she whispered. "Even if it was too late." "You can believe it," I said gently. "He was flawed, but he loved you in his way. I think he just didn't know how." Elsie nodded slowly. Then she looked at me, for the first time without suspicion. "I'd like to know you better," she said. "If that's all right." My chest tightened, relief and sorrow blending into something I couldn't name. "I'd like that very much." But outside the house, as I stepped back into the night, Judith stood across the road, watching. And in her hand, she held a second envelope. Judith's silhouette was as still as the street lamp beside her. The light caught the envelope in her hand, almost as if it glowed with its own cold truth. I stopped on the pavement. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then she crossed the road with a purpose that sent a chill through my spine. "This," she said, holding out the envelope, "wasn't meant for you. But you deserve to read it." I didn't reach for it. "What is it?" She let out a short breath. "Edward wrote it weeks before he died. He gave it to me the day he found out he only had months left. Why are you only giving it to me now? Judith's expression cracked for a second. Because I didn't want to believe it. What he said in there. It changes things. I took the envelope with trembling hands and walked slowly back to my flat before opening it. The air was too thick in the room. I sat down, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter. The first line made my breath hitch. To Clara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to say it aloud. His handwriting was a little shakier than before, but every word was clear. I failed you. Not just as a partner but as a man. I let fear rule my choices. I let my mother dictate what my life should look like, and I hurt the only person who ever truly believed in me. You were right about Elsie. She needed me, and I left her because I couldn't bear the shame of who I had become. I told myself I was protecting her. But really, I was protecting myself. From judgment. From love. I lied. Clara. Not just about leaving. But about the end. I stopped, heart thudding. The lines blurred for a moment before I read on. The night I left you I knew. I knew about the cancer. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to disappear before you saw what I was becoming. I thought if I pushed you away, you'd forget me quicker. But I see now, through the priest, through every moment since, that I was wrong. Love doesn't dissolve like that. It waits. It aches. You deserve the truth. So here it is. I never stopped loving you. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to come back. I even stood outside your door once, but I saw you through the window with Elsie and couldn't step forward. You looked happy. You looked whole. I couldn't risk breaking that again. Please forgive me, Clara. Not because I earned it but because I want you to be free. Not bound to the past. Not haunted by what I could have done. Live. For yourself. For Elsie. You're stronger than you know. The signature was faint, almost erased by the stroke of a shaking hand. I sat with the letter for hours. Long after the lights dimmed and the city fell silent. The truth didn't make it easier. But it made it real. I wasn't the villain in Edward's story, no matter what others whispered. I had been the one left standing in the ashes, carrying the pain he couldn't. Weeks passed. Elsie began calling every other day. Slowly, she shared bits of her life. Her dreams, her regrets, her fears. We walked in parks, baked banana bread that failed twice but made us laugh, and pieced together what could be salvaged. And then one day, at a small remembrance event for Edward hosted quietly by the priest, Elsie stood beside me. Judith arrived late. Her hair was pinned back, her posture straighter than usual. She handed Elsie a single white lily and said softly, "He did love you in his own broken way." Elsie took the flower, then reached for my hand. She didn't let go. And for the first time in years, I felt the wind carry not sorrow, but something close to peace.